In the maze-like chambers beneath our feet lies a world few dare to explore. 3 caves, 3 teams, 3 stories that would forever change the face of cave exploration. From narrow passages that whisper ancient secrets to flooded chambers that guard their mysteries, these are the stories of when adventure met adversity in the planet's darkest corners. The tragedy of Actun Cave. At 9:15 a.m. on Saturday, November 26, 2016, 23-year-old Amy Maria Araga stood at the mouth of Mexico's Actun cave system, her GoPro Hero 5 capturing what should have been another routine cave exploration. With over 163 kilometers of mapped passageways, Actun was the second longest underwater cave system in the world, a maze-like cave made of limestone that had attracted explorers for hundreds of years. Amy, a certified cave diver with 47 documented dives, had no way of knowing that in exactly 37 minutes, she would find herself in the darkest nightmare of her life. The temperature inside Actun held steady at 24 degrees Celsius, 75 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. Perfect conditions for what Amy had planned as a 2-hour recreational dive. But 400 meters into the cave system, past the tourist-friendly Gran Cenote entrance, everything changed. Her primary light failed, then her backup. In the absolute darkness of the underwater cavern, where even the beam of a rescue light couldn't penetrate more than 3 meters through the mineral-rich water, Amy began her desperate fight for survival. The subsequent investigation by CONANP, National Commission of Natural Protected Areas, would later reveal critical gaps in cave diving protocols that had been overlooked for decades. But for now, trapped in the darkness at a depth of 27 meters, Amy had only her training, her dwindling air supply, and her will to live. Amy Maria Araga wasn't just another thrill seeker. Her diving logbook chronicled 32 successful cave dives across Central America, but Actun's legendary passages called to her like no other. In October 2016, she reached out to Alessandro Reato, a master cave diver with 15 years of experience and over 500 documented dives. Other cave divers really respected him because he had taught many excellent divers how to explore caves. For 6 grueling weeks, Alessandro put Amy through intensive cave diving scenarios. They practiced emergency protocols in the darkness of Cenote Calavera, mastered line-following techniques in the currents of Sistema dos Ojos, and perfected their communication signals. On that fateful November morning, Alessandro believed Amy was ready. Their dive plan seemed foolproof. Amy would lead, maintaining a maximum depth of 40 feet, while Alessandro followed 10 feet behind with his underwater camera, documenting their journey along the upstream guideline. The morning briefing lasted 45 minutes, covering every detail, every contingency. Yet neither of them could have predicted how the crystalline waters of Actun would transform from a diver's paradise into a watery tomb. The digital clock on Alessandro's dive computer blinked 11:26 a.m. as they slipped beneath the turquoise surface of Actun's entrance pool. The water temperature was perfect, visibility stretched to 30 meters, and Amy's excitement was palpable even through her diving mask. Leading the way, her fins kicked up tiny clouds of limestone silt as Alessandro's camera captured her graceful movements through the ancient passageways. After swimming underwater for 25 minutes, when they were 37 feet deep, Alessandro saw something special. Sunlight shining down through a hidden hole in the cave's ceiling, making the clear water glow bright blue. He got Amy's attention, while their diving lights shone on the cave's beautiful rock shapes. It was time to make sure all their diving equipment was working properly. Alessandro's trained eyes scanned Amy's equipment methodically. Depth gauge reading 37 feet, within limits. Primary air tank pressure at 2,100 psi, sufficient. Backup regulator, properly positioned. Amy's eyes sparkled behind her mask as she returned the OK signal, eager to press forward into the unexplored passage ahead. They didn't notice that the water's movement had changed slightly, or that the water was slowly getting darker as they swam deeper into the cave. They approached the infamous no-name chamber, a section of Actun that even veteran cave divers spoke of in whispers. Its reputation was built on tragedy, 3 documented diving accidents in the past decade alone. The passage was deceptive. Its entrance, barely wide enough for a single diver, opened into a vast underwater cathedral. After they swam through the tight entrance of No Name Cave, everything around them changed. Streams of sunlight came through hidden holes in the ceiling, making beautiful rays of light that moved through the clear water. Very old pointed rocks, which took millions of years to form, hung down from the top of the cave like waterfalls that had stopped moving. As a photographer, Alessandro had a sudden urge to take a picture. Amy was outlined by this amazing natural light. It would make a perfect photo to add to her collection of cave diving pictures. He quickly made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. To get the perfect shot, he turned off his diving lights. The natural sunlight coming from behind would make Amy look like a dark shape against the beautiful glowing cave. The passage suddenly split before her, a Y junction that hadn't appeared in any of their briefing discussions. The left tunnel pulled them forward with a gentle flow of water, while the right tunnel went deeper into the dark caves of Actun. Her heart raced behind her pressure gauge as she faced the first major decision of the dive. The milliseconds stretched like hours as her mind raced through Alessandro's training sessions. Amy made the choice, banking left into the passage. Her fins kicked up small clouds of silt as she waited for Alessandro's warning signal, 3 rapid light flashes that would indicate a wrong turn. But behind her, there was only silence and darkness. No light signals pierced the water. No warning came. What Amy couldn't know was that at that precise moment, Alessandro had powered down his lights for the perfect photo. In one moment she was swimming through normal cave paths, but in the next moment, she was surrounded by a deep darkness that felt like it was moving. Her breath quickened, each exhale sending a cascade of bubbles toward a ceiling she could no longer see. This wasn't part of their planned route. The branching passages they'd studied never mentioned this section, this lightless void where even the cave walls seemed to vanish. Alessandro must be getting a good laugh, she thought, trying to calm her rising panic. But Alessandro was never one for pranks, not in these caves. She flashed her light 3 times quickly, which is how cave divers tell others they need help. But the darkness ate up her light signals completely. She turned all the way around in a circle, and her swimming fins stirred up old dirt from the bottom. She heard nothing except her own breathing and the steady sound of her air tank. The cave felt like it was getting smaller and closer around her with each moment that passed. As the last air bubbles from her spinning floated up into the dark water, Amy realized something terrifying. She was all alone in one of the world's most dangerous caves. Meanwhile, 150 feet back, Alessandro's camera hung forgotten at his side, as ice-cold realization gripped his chest. The space where Amy should have been was empty. His powerful lights cut through the clear water, revealing nothing but dancing particles and ancient limestone. No fins, no bubbles, no sign of human presence. His mind raced through the last 45 seconds. He'd looked down to adjust his camera settings. 10 seconds. Turned off his lights for the photo. 5 seconds. And in that heartbeat of darkness, Amy had vanished. Alessandro executed a perfect 90-degree sweep around a massive limestone formation, his experienced eyes scanning every crevice and shadow. The crystal-clear water that had made this dive so perfect now seemed to mock him. There was nowhere Amy could hide, yet she was gone. Then Alessandro made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. With unwavering confidence in his assessment, he began removing the safety line markers, their breadcrumb trail back through Actun's labyrinth. The last marker came free in his hand at 11:57 a.m. In that same moment, nearly 200 feet away in a pitch-black side passage, Amy was beginning to realize that the darkness around her wasn't just another beautiful cave feature. It was a tomb slowly closing its ancient doors. In the obsidian darkness, Amy's world had shrunk to the sound of her own breathing and the weak cone of light from her primary torch. She started breathing faster and harder, finding it more difficult to take each breath. The cave diving rules she had learned during her training now scared her. She knew that at this depth, breathing this quickly, she only had about 20 minutes of air left in her tank, maybe even less. Alessandro burst through the surface at 12:45 p.m., ripping off his mask as his eyes desperately scanned the cenote's edge. No Amy, no discarded tanks, no sign of life. His watch mocked him with its precision. 3 hours and 19 minutes since Amy's disappearance. The sun had shifted overhead, casting different shadows on the limestone walls of the cenote. Racing against time that he didn't have, Alessandro scrambled through the nearby dive camp, his wet footprints marking his frantic search for spare air tanks. Each empty tank he found sent another spike of dread through his chest. At 2:13 p.m., he finally secured a fresh tank from a returning dive group. Swimming back into the water that was getting darker, Alessandro carefully set up his safety rope, placing bright orange markers along it in the clear water. The rope followed behind him like a path to safety, not just for him, but for Amy, if she was still down in the cave, still living, and still able to follow the rope back out. But as he retraced their morning's path, the terrible math of cave diving played out in his head. Amy's tank had contained enough air for 65 minutes at normal breathing rates. It had been 182 minutes since he'd last seen her. At 2:27 p.m., Alessandro's light beam caught something drifting near the entrance of No Name Cave. His trained eye recognized the shape immediately, but his mind refused to accept what he saw. Amy's form hung suspended in the crystalline water, eerily peaceful, her dive gear still perfectly arranged, except for the regulator that had slipped from her lips. Time seemed to freeze in that moment of discovery. Her blonde hair floated like a halo around her face, the dive mask still perfectly sealed, a cruel reminder of how hard she had fought to survive. Alessandro's trembling hands reached for his spare emergency regulator, even as his decades of experience told him what his heart couldn't accept. He initiated the rescue protocol that he'd taught hundreds of times: establish an airway, begin rescue breathing. But as the waters of Actun swirled around them, Amy's body told the story of her final moments. The empty tanks, the foam at her mouth, the position of her hands, frozen in a final desperate reach toward where a guideline should have been. At 2:43 p.m., on the surface of the cenote where their adventure had begun just hours earlier, Alessandro made the call no dive instructor ever wants to make. The ancient Maya had believed Actun was a gateway to the underworld. Today, it had proven why. At 3:18 p.m., Alessandro came up from the underwater cave, holding Amy's lifeless body as the sun was going down. The clear, beautiful water that had looked so exciting earlier now seemed dark, as if it knew what had happened. Police officers from the area and cave rescue experts were waiting by the water, looking sad because they had seen this kind of tragedy happen many times before. As Amy Maria Arriaga's body was carefully lifted from the waters of Actun, she became the sixth soul claimed by the Grand Cenote's deceptive beauty. The investigation would later reveal that these passages, these ancient limestone arteries of the Yucatan, had been collecting their toll for centuries, from the Maya who first ventured into their depths to modern explorers seeking their secrets. The cave diving community responded swiftly. New warning signs were erected at the Grand Cenote entrance, detailing the system's 5 previous victims. Amy's story became a mandatory part of every cave diving briefing in the region. But the ancient Maya had always known this truth. They called these cenotes Xibalba, gateways to the underworld. And despite all modern precautions, the caves continue to whisper their siren song to those who dare to explore their depths. While the waters of Actun held their old secrets in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, 2,000 miles north, another cave system had already written its own dark story in the history of cave exploration. In the rough mountains of Georgia, United States, Ellison Cave stood as a deep pit, not filled with water, but with darkness just as complete. The Ellison Cave Tragedy. On a cold Saturday morning, February 12, 2011, 10 students from the University of Florida's Outdoor Adventure Club arrived at the entrance of Ellison Cave in Walker County, Georgia. The temperature outside was just 34 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree Celsius, but their excitement kept them warm. Ellison Cave wasn't just any cave. It dropped 1,063 feet straight down, making it the deepest cave east of the Mississippi River. Its most feared feature was the Fantastic Pit, a 586-foot straight drop that could fit the Washington Monument with room to spare. Experienced cavers called it the Empire State Building of Pits. The winter of 2011 was stubbornly holding on in northern Georgia, with temperatures hovering around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, -2 degrees Celsius, that February morning. But the cold couldn't dampen the spirits of 10 University of Florida students, 5 guys and 5 girls, as they piled into 2 SUVs for their weekend adventure. Leading the group was Grant Lockenbach, a 20-year-old mechanical engineering junior with a perfect 4.0 GPA. Just 6 days away from his 21st birthday, Grant had already mapped out his future: graduate school at MIT, then a career designing spacecraft. His logbook showed he had explored 12 caves in the past year alone. Beside him sat his best friend, Michael Perry, a 20-year-old studying aerospace engineering. The two had met at the university's Christian Fellowship group, bonding over their shared love of extreme sports. Just 3 weeks earlier, on January 22nd, Grant and Michael had successfully explored Florida's Devil's Cave system, a relatively simple horizontal cave with a maximum depth of 70 feet. The experience had boosted their confidence. Ellison Cave, they figured, would just be another adventure to add to their growing list. What they didn't know was that comparing Devil's Cave to Ellison was like comparing a kiddie pool to the Pacific Ocean. The temperature in Ellison's deepest section stayed at a constant 42 degrees Fahrenheit, 5.5 degrees Celsius, year-round, and its maze of vertical drops had claimed lives before. Their previous caving experience, while impressive sounding over coffee at the campus Starbucks, was about to prove dangerously inadequate. On that cold February morning, their target was Ellison Cave, a monster of a cave system that plunged 1,063 feet into Pigeon Mountain's limestone heart. Located in Walker County, Georgia's rugged northwest corner, Ellison wasn't just deep, it was dangerous. Its famous Fantastic Pit dropped a straight 586 feet, deep enough to stack 2 statues of Liberty inside. The students' journey had started at 6 p.m. on Friday, February 11th, when they left Gainesville, Florida in 2 vehicles, Grant's blue Toyota 4Runner and Sarah Mitchell's silver Honda Pilot. They drove through the night, covering 437 miles of highway, before reaching the sleep-in at Lafayette, Georgia, at 2 a.m. The hotel sat just 12 miles from Pigeon Mountain's base. At 8:30 a.m., the group gathered in the hotel parking lot, sorting their gear. Their equipment list was worryingly basic: 4 climbing ropes, each 200 feet long, 10 basic climbing harnesses from Dick's Sporting Goods, 10 hardware store helmets with mounted LED lights, a few spare flashlights and batteries, 2 backpacks with snacks and water bottles. Following what they thought was standard caving practice, they left their phones in their vehicles at the mountain's base parking lot. "They'll just get damaged underground," Grant had said, making a decision that would later haunt the rescue efforts. The temperature was now 34 degrees Fahrenheit, but most of them wore just cotton t-shirts, shorts, and sneakers, clothing that would prove disastrously inadequate for Ellison's wet, 42 degrees Fahrenheit cave environment. The group started their hike up Pigeon Mountain at 9:45 a.m., following the muddy trail to the cave's entrance. None of them noticed the weathered warning sign that listed the cave's previous fatalities, or the small thermometer that showed the dropping temperature. In just 4 hours, their casual weekend adventure would turn into a desperate fight for survival in one of America's most challenging cave systems. By 10:45 a.m., as they climbed higher up Pigeon Mountain's rocky trail, the temperature had dropped to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 1 degree Celsius. The wind cut through their thin cotton clothes, but no one wanted to be the first to complain. After a 45-minute hike that gained 400 feet in elevation, they found the cave's entrance, and their confident chatter died. Instead of the wide opening they'd expected, Ellison's mouth was barely 2 feet wide, with sharp limestone edges that looked like teeth. The narrow crack disappeared into absolute darkness, dropping straight down for 20 feet before opening into the cave system. Michael shined his headlamp down the crack, but the beam disappeared into nothingness. The air flowing out of the cave was even colder than outside, carrying a damp, ancient smell. At 11:15 a.m., they began entering one by one. Each person had to turn sideways to squeeze through the narrow entrance, their backpacks scraping against the rough rock walls. The limestone was wet and cold against their bare arms. Emily Chen, the most experienced rock climber in the group, went first, setting up the belay rope for others to follow. As each student disappeared into the crack, their headlamp beams created dancing circles in the misty darkness below. None of them realized they were entering what cavers called the warm-up drop, named not for its temperature, but because it was just a taste of the much bigger drops to come. By 11:45 a.m., all 10 of them had vanished into Ellison's depths, leaving only their footprints in the frozen mud above. At 12 p.m., their lights showed them something magical: the cave's beautiful white rock formations hanging from the roof like frozen daggers. Each one had taken thousands of years to form, one tiny drip at a time, but this beauty was deadly. The cave was freezing at 42 degrees Fahrenheit. 5.5 degrees Celsius, and the damp air made their bones shiver. The group had just decided to turn back when disaster struck. Jenny Martinez, reaching for her water bottle, accidentally knocked her backpack over the edge of what cavers called the warm-up pit. The warm-up pit, while not as famous as Fantastic Pit, was still a serious challenge. A 125-foot vertical drop with a roaring waterfall that sprayed near freezing mist into the air. The waterfall, fed by melting surface ice, thundered at 15 gallons per second, creating a constant wind that dropped the temperature around the pit to near 38 degrees Fahrenheit, 3.3 degrees Celsius. The backpack contained critical supplies. Grant Lockenbach checked his watch, 12:15 p.m. "I can be down and back in 20 minutes, he said, already pulling on his climbing harness. At 12:20 p.m., Grant began his descent into the warm-up pit. Michael Perry, his best friend, tied off the safety rope and gave him a thumbs up. The others watched nervously as Grant's headlamp beam grew smaller and smaller, not knowing they were witnessing the beginning of a 30-hour nightmare that would push human endurance to its absolute limits. At 12:25 p.m., Grant began his descent into the warm-up pit. The first 50 feet went smoothly. Then the temperature dropped sharply, from 42 degrees Fahrenheit to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. His thin cotton t-shirt offered no protection against the cold air rising from below. At 60 feet down, the roar of the waterfall became deafening, 15 gallons per second of near-freezing water crashing against limestone. Grant could still hear his friends' voices echoing from above, calling out encouragements. His hands, already numb from cold, gripped the rope tighter. 75 feet into the darkness, everything went wrong. Grant tried to dodge the waterfall when he heard it, a sharp ping from his climbing gear. The rope jammed. He hung there, frozen in the blackness, unable to move up or down. Fear took over. Grant pulled hard on the rope to break free, but this only made things worse. The wet rope twisted around his legs like a snake. Then came the moment that sealed his fate. As he fought with the tangled rope, he swung right into the icy waterfall's path. The impact of the 38-degree Fahrenheit water hit him like 1,000 needles. "Help!" His scream echoed up the pit, but the waterfall's roar nearly drowned it out. His body temperature plunged dangerously fast. Medical experts later estimated he lost 10 degrees of body heat in just minutes. At 12:32 p.m., Michael Perry didn't wait for a group decision. He clipped onto the same rope, a decision that violated every cave rescue protocol. "Hold on, Grant!" he shouted, rappelling down into the darkness. The group above watched his headlamp beam bounce off the wet walls as he descended. Michael reached Grant at 12:37 p.m. What he found terrified him. His friend was barely conscious, his speech slurred, his movements clumsy. These were clear signs of severe hypothermia. Grant's lips had turned blue, and his hands couldn't grip the rope anymore. "He's alive!" Michael shouted up to the group. "But he's freezing! We need help!" The relief above lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Michael's rope, already wet and stressed from Grant's weight, made the same horrible ping sound. Both students were now trapped, hanging 75 feet above the pit's bottom, being sprayed by near-freezing water, with their body temperatures dropping by the minute. The time was 12:40 p.m. The nearest cave rescue team was 45 minutes away. "We can't move!" Michael's voice echoed up the pit. "The ropes are stuck!" Above, the group split into action. Tom Anderson took charge. "Emily, Sarah, Jenny, stay here and keep talking to them. Everyone else, run for help, now." At 1:15 p.m., 5 students burst out of the cave entrance, their legs burning from climbing the narrow passage. They practically fell down Pigeon Mountain's trail, covering what had been an hour's climb in just 27 minutes. Their lungs were on fire, but fear drove them forward. Inside the cave, the situation was deteriorating fast. Grant had stopped shivering, a dangerous sign. Medical experts later explained that when the body temperature drops below 92 degrees Fahrenheit, shivering stops completely. At 2:19 p.m., the rescue call finally went out. The students' phones, left in their cars, showed multiple missed calls from worried parents. The Walker County Cave Rescue Team was mobilized immediately, but they were 45 minutes away. The 3 students still at the pit edge watched in horror as the ropes swayed gently in the waterfall's spray. The boys' headlamps were still on, creating weak circles of light in the mist, but their owners had fallen silent. The cave's constant 42 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, combined with the waterfall's freezing spray, had finally overcome their bodies' ability to generate heat. At 3:05 p.m., the Walker County Cave and Cliff Rescue Team arrived, led by veteran rescuer Steve Wilson. The scene at the cave entrance was chaos. 8 hypothermic students being treated with emergency blankets as they sobbed and pointed toward the cave's mouth. The rescue team, wearing specialized cold weather caving gear rated for sub-zero temperatures, entered Ellison at 3:15 p.m. Their high-powered lights cut through the mist as they descended to the warm-up pit. The waterfall's roar couldn't mask the sound of crying from above. At 3:30 p.m., lead rescuer Mike Thompson reached the boys. His voice crackled over the radio. No pulse on either victim. Body temperatures far below survivable levels. The ropes are frozen to their climbing harnesses. The recovery operation proved brutally difficult. The same conditions that had killed Grant and Michael now threatened the rescue team. The waterfall had literally frozen parts of the rope to the boys' clothes and gear. Every attempt to free them risked the rescuers' own safety. At 10:07 p.m., under portable floodlights, they finally brought Grant and Michael to the surface. The boys' fingers were still frozen around their ropes, a testament to how hard they had fought to survive. Their friends, who had refused to leave the cave entrance, broke down at the sight. The medical examiner would later confirm what everyone already knew. The cause of death was severe hypothermia, with core body temperatures estimated to have dropped to 82 degrees Fahrenheit, 27.8 degrees Celsius, before they lost consciousness. They had died the way they had lived, together, trying to help each other until the very end. The deaths of Grant Lockenbach and Michael Perry on February 12, 2011, sent shockwaves through both the caving community and the University of Florida campus. The tragedy led to immediate changes in cave safety protocols across the southeastern United States. Today, at the entrance to Ellison Cave, a new warning sign tells their story. Next to it, a temperature gauge and detailed weather warnings have been installed. The warm-up pit now has permanent anchors and safety lines, while the waterfall has been partially diverted during winter months. But perhaps the most powerful change came from within the caving community itself. The Grant and Michael rule became standard practice. No cave entry in cotton clothing, no matter the season. Cave rescue teams across America now use their story in training sessions, emphasizing how quickly conditions can turn deadly when proper preparation meets overconfidence. At the University of Florida, February 12th is now marked as Cave Safety Awareness Day. The Mechanical Engineering Building, where Grant spent countless hours studying, displays their climbing gear in a glass case, a sobering reminder that nature deserves respect, no matter your skill level. In the end, Ellison Cave took 2 bright young lives, but gave back a legacy of caution and respect that has likely saved many others. As veteran cave rescuer Steve Wilson often tells new cavers, the mountain doesn't care how brave you are, how smart you are, or how good your intentions are. It only cares if you're prepared. The tragedies of Sac Actun and Ellison Cave proved that underground waters demand respect. But miles away, in the crystal-clear seas of Hawaii, nature was preparing to teach an even harsher lesson. While cave diving had its obvious dangers, darkness, tight spaces, cold, what happened to Linnea Mills in 2020 would show that death could come just as swiftly in open water, under bright sun, on a seemingly perfect day. As the diving world still whispered about the cave tragedies, another story was about to unfold in paradise. The Linnea Mills diving tragedy. On a bright morning in 2020, Linnea Mills stepped onto a diving boat in Hawaii's crystal-clear waters. At 34 years old, she was excited to take her diving skills to the next level. 2 certified instructors stood beside her on the boat, ready to teach. The ocean was calm, the weather perfect. It seemed like nothing could go wrong. But in just 45 minutes, this routine training dive would turn into a desperate fight for life. With 2 experienced instructors nearby, with safety equipment all around, with perfect diving conditions, how could everything go so terribly wrong? This is the story of how a simple, advanced diving lesson became Linnea Mills' last dive. It's a story that would shake the diving community and raise frightening questions. How could a supervised training dive end in death? More importantly, why didn't anyone see the danger signs until it was too late? The ocean that morning was hiding a deadly secret, one that would surface only after Linnea had taken her final breath. To understand Linnea's story, we first need to know about PADI, diving's global safety guardian since 1966. With over 6,600 dive centers worldwide, PADI sets the rules that keep divers safe underwater. They don't own these diving schools. Instead, places like Gulf Dive in Missoula pay to use PADI's trusted name and follow their strict training methods. When Linnea signed up for her advanced training, she chose PADI because it meant safety and trust. After all, they'd taught millions to dive safely for over 50 years. But that morning in Hawaii, even Patty's careful system wouldn't be enough to save her life. Linnea Mills didn't just want to dive. She dreamed of studying the ocean's secrets as a marine biologist. Her first taste of this underwater world came in 2018, when she glided through the warm waters of Australia's Great Barrier Reef. That dive changed her life. Soon she was volunteering on marine biology projects at the University of North Carolina, but she knew she needed more advanced diving skills for her future career. That's what brought her to Gulf Dive in Missoula, Montana. The center was known for training divers in Lake McDonald, a perfect spot for advanced training. A massive lake in Glacier National Park, stretching 10 miles long and plunging 472 feet deep. Its crystal clear waters, sitting 3,153 feet above sea level, made it ideal for teaching complex diving skills. Linnea was ready to push her limits in these deep, cold waters. She didn't know these same clear waters, so different from the warm reef where she first fell in love with diving, would test her in ways she never imagined. The difference between Linnea's diving experiences was like night and day. In the Great Barrier Reef, she'd enjoyed warm waters at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for a regular wetsuit. But Lake McDonald was a different world. Fed by melting glaciers, its waters were bone-chilling at 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This kind of cold could kill. That's where the dry suit came in. Think of a wetsuit like a wet sponge. It lets water in, and your body wastes energy trying to heat this water up. Even worse, every time you move, warm water escapes and cold water rushes in. Water steals body heat 25 times faster than air does. But a dry suit? It's like wearing a waterproof shield. No water gets in at all. Instead, it traps a warm layer of air around your body. You can even wear warm clothes underneath because they stay completely dry. It's the difference between swimming in an ice bath and walking in a cozy bubble of warmth. For the frigid waters of Lake McDonald, this wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. A mistaken gear choice here could be deadly. But a dry suit, while life-saving in cold water, could also turn deadly if misused. It's all about air and pressure. The deeper you dive, the more the air in your suit gets squeezed. To stay warm and buoyant, you need to add more air using a special valve connected to your tank. Then comes the tricky part. As you swim back up, that compressed air starts to expand. Think of a balloon rising from the bottom of a pool. It gets bigger and bigger. If you don't release this expanding air through a dump valve, your dry suit can inflate like that balloon, sending you shooting to the surface. This rapid rise, called an uncontrolled ascent, can burst your lungs or give you the bends, both potentially fatal. That's why PADI created a special course just for dry suit diving. Every button, every valve, every squeeze of air needs careful control. Linnea was about to learn all this in Lake McDonald's deep waters. But sometimes, even the best training can't prepare you for everything that can go wrong underwater. On her first advanced dive at Lake Sealy, Linnea learned just how brutal Montana's waters could be. Even wearing 2 wetsuits, her own and one borrowed from another student who'd chosen not to dive, the cold bit through to her bones. After that ice-cold experience, Gulf Dive's owners, David and Janine Olson, urged Linnea to buy a dry suit. She listened, finding a used one she could afford. November 1st, 2020 started like any other training day. Linnea arrived at Gulf Dive Center with her second-hand dry suit, meeting her fellow students, Bob Gentry and his wife Shannon, who was just watching, another student called E.G., and Joel Wilson. Their instructors, Deborah Snow and Seth Liston, gave a quick safety talk before the group began their 3-hour drive to Lake McDonald. During the drive, Linnea chatted excitedly with Bob about diving and her dreams of becoming a marine biologist. No one in that car knew they were heading toward disaster. At Lake McDonald's shore, excitement masked a deadly oversight. As Linnea struggled into her new second-hand dry suit, something caught her eye, a small connector on the chest. Confused, she turned to Bob, who'd just finished his dry suit training course. "That's for the inflator hose," Bob explained. It connects to your air tank to add air to your suit, but Linnea's used suit was missing this vital hose. Worried, she asked her instructor Deborah Snow what to do. Snow's answer would later haunt everyone. Just use your BCD to control your buoyancy. A BCD, buoyancy control device, is like a life jacket with a twist. Normally, you fill it with air to float at the surface, then release air to sink. As you go deeper, you add small amounts of air to float weightlessly. But using a BCD instead of a dry suit inflator? That's like trying to drive a car with only the parking brake to control your speed. Without that special hose, Linnea's dry suit would squeeze tighter and tighter as she went deeper, like being wrapped in a shrinking rubber band. The cold water would press in, making it harder to move, harder to think, harder to survive. No one on that shoreline realized they were about to watch a deadly chain of events unfold, all starting with a missing hose and a fateful decision. On the shore, Shannon Gentry noticed something wasn't right. She wanted to question the instructors again about Linnea's missing hose, but Linnea spoke first. If they say it's okay, I'm sure it's fine. Those would be some of her last words. The group entered the darkening waters at 5 p.m. No one had brought lights, though the sun was already setting. Breaking standard safety rules, the instructors skipped the usual pre-dive checks and briefing. The dive started simple enough. Instructor Deborah Snow took Linnea and EG down to 16 feet. After 5 minutes, EG returned to the surface with Snow. Linnea stayed behind, her dry suit already squeezing uncomfortably, but she didn't want to waste the 3-hour drive by calling off the dive. Snow hadn't noticed anything wrong. Then Seth Liston, the safety instructor, led Bob Gentry and Joel Wilson down. Snow returned with EG, and the whole group descended to 60 feet, stopping on an underwater ledge. Bob noticed something terrifying. Linnea was clearly in distress, desperately trying to signal the instructors. Neither Snow nor Liston saw her frantic attempts for help. Linnea turned to Bob in panic. He swam toward her, but it was too late. In that moment, compressed by her suit and unable to control her movement, Linnea slipped off the ledge into the dark depths below. Bob chased Linnea down through the dark water, catching her at 85 feet. What he saw chilled him more than the freezing lake. Her dry suit had compressed so tight she couldn't even breathe. Her eyes were wide with terror behind her mask. Racing against time, Bob grabbed for her BCD inflator, but it was already full of air, and still they kept sinking. Desperate, he reached for her weight belt, every diver's emergency release, but found nothing. He frantically searched for the quick-release weight pockets in her BCD, feeling the weights inside, but finding no way to dump them. At 104 feet deep, Linnea's regulator fell from her mouth. Bob's own air was running out from his frantic rescue attempt. With crushing guilt, he had to make an impossible choice: let go or die with her. He released his grip and shot to the surface, lungs burning. Breaking through into twilight, Bob spun around looking for help, but there was no safety boat, no surface watch, no one to save Linnea. The lake's surface had never looked so empty. When Snow surfaced and heard Bob's desperate news, she made a brief attempt to find Linnea in the dimming water. Nothing. The instructors changed their air tanks and went back down for a second search. They found her body at 128 feet, motionless, trapped by her own equipment. Even in death, Linnea's gear worked against her. They had to remove her BCD just to lift her to the surface. The final cruel detail would later shock investigators. Linnea had been wearing 44 pounds of weights, double what an experienced male diver would need for the same dive. But the tragedy wasn't over. With no cell service at the lake, a passing couple had to drive 30 minutes just to call emergency services. Meanwhile, Instructor Snow removed Linnea's dive computer and course paperwork, crucial evidence that would never reach investigators. Later, when they recovered Linnea's equipment, the truth became clear. This wasn't just an accident. A missing dry suit hose, skipped safety checks, double the necessary weights, and now missing evidence. A chain of fatal mistakes that turned a training dive into a death trap. The cover-up began immediately. At a post-accident meeting, Gulf Dive owner Janine Olson tried to blame Bob Gentry, telling him he was responsible for not saving Linnea. She later told the coroner a different story, that Linnea had panicked and dropped after swimming fine at 40 feet. But Bob's GoPro told the truth. It revealed something even more disturbing. Deborah Snow, Linnea's instructor, had just gotten her teaching certificate. She wasn't qualified to teach dry suit diving, and clearly didn't understand that a dry suit needs an inflator hose to work safely. This wasn't Gulf Dive's first tragedy. Just a year earlier, in 2019, they'd rented faulty gear to an unqualified diver who died. That lawsuit was still open when Linnea died. Their pattern was clear: poor training, dangerous decisions, then blame the victims. The Mills family sued Gulf Dive, Instructor Snow, and PADI. They settled out of court. Putty changed some rules after Linnea's death, but many diving experts say this isn't enough. They argue Putty needs to do more than just write safety rules. They need to make sure dive centers actually follow them. Linnea Mills didn't die because she panicked. She died because of a chain of deadly choices: an instructor who didn't know better, a dive center that didn't care, and a certification system that looked the other way. Her story now serves as a warning. In diving, there's no room for shortcuts when lives are at stake. The caves of Actun, the depths of Ellison, and the waters of Lake McDonald each tell a different story of nature's power, but they share one crucial truth: respect for the elements cannot be replaced by confidence, and safety protocols aren't just suggestions. Amy Maria Araga, Grant Lockenbach, and Michael Perry, and Linnea Mills all lost their lives not in extreme conditions or during daring feats, but during what should have been routine activities under supervision. The most important lesson came from how these tragedies happened, not in darkness or storms or dangerous conditions, but on normal days, with qualified guides, in seemingly safe situations. Their legacy reminds us that nature's power deserves respect every single time we venture into its domain, no matter how familiar or safe it might seem.